Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. Today, I want to talk about the power of clear decisions and the simple frame that I use, or at least try to use, whenever I'm not sure what to do or which direction to take. A lot of my approach to finding this clarity comes from an inverted process. I find it very helpful to think of decisions in terms of not being indecisive, and I'll explain what I mean by that in just a minute. Welcome to The Joy Within. I'm Kyle Greenfield, and I believe that you have the ability to become calm, confident, and happy anytime that you choose. Some days, that's easier than others, but with the right tools and the right way of thinking, we can unlock incredible states of joy, peace, and well-being within us. So visit thejoywithin.org to get started today, so that together we can create a happier and more peaceful world. The reason for this is because indecision is something that I've really struggled with over the years. I love to think and imagine and plan and play devil's advocate. I love exploring all sides of a question or thinking through different possible scenarios and outcomes that might happen. And all of that means is that I have a strong tendency to overthink things, to consistently relitigate decisions, to reassess the right course of action. And if I allow my mind to slip into that state, I find it just constantly spin in circles, remaking the same decisions over and over and over again. So for me, I find it easier and much more helpful to think of decisions in terms of catching indecision, and then using that indecision to actually ground me and reaffirm the right decision that I want to make. So there are a few key principles behind this that I want to discuss. The first is that the power of decision isn't in making the decision, it's in sticking to it. Number 2, indecision causes stress by pulling us out of alignment. Number 3, often indecision is a guise for fear. Number 4, the cost of an unmade decision is higher than we think, and often it's higher than the cost of a wrong decision. And number 5 is that we always already know what the right path is. Sometimes we just can't see it. By the way, if you don't know me, I'm Kyle Greenfield. I've been an entrepreneur for nearly 20 years now. First, I had a tech startup in San Francisco, then I ran a marketing agency, and since 2018, I've run The Joy Within, where I help business owners reduce stress and manage the mental load of running a business. So I have experienced all of these issues firsthand, and these are the tactics and the frames of reference that have really helped me. So if you run a business and have struggled with stress or indecision, then I want you to know that I'm here to help. And you can visit thejoywithin.org to schedule a free one-on-one call. So that said, let's dive into the 5 principles to help you make and stick to the right decisions. When I was younger, I thought that making decisions was about making the decision. I would spend so much time gathering information, thinking it through, outlining possible contingencies, inventing plans and things like that, trying to get really clear on making the right call. And that sounds like a reasonable thing to do, especially for big decisions. Obviously, we want to be right. But the problem is, if we get stuck in this phase, then the decision often gets made without us. Either we stumble into something by default, or the window of opportunity closes, and indecision just makes the decision for us, or the decision becomes redundant in some way. So, for example, maybe a business opportunity goes away because you didn't act quickly enough, but you couldn't act because you put so much pressure on yourself to make the right decision. Or I'll give you a lighter example. A few years ago, my wife and I redid our kitchen, and we spent months going to different stores, planning out the space, choosing the materials, gathering different quotes, everything like that. But by the time we actually bought the kitchen, we were just so fed up with the whole process that we ended up buying somewhat on a whim. So despite all of our hard work, all of the information gathering, none of it mattered because we made the choice somewhat randomly. And we wound up with a countertop that was completely different than what we thought we were getting. We put so much time into trying to make the right decision that we wound up just getting whatever out of sheer exasperation. To be clear, I'm not saying don't gather information. I'm saying that we need to recognize when we're just languishing in the decision versus when we actually need more information. And there's a point at which trying to get more information starts to have diminishing returns and then even starts to work against you. So I've developed a frame of thinking whereby if I have the right information, the decision should be obvious to me. And if it isn't obvious, the answer is no. I have found thinking in this way to be extremely liberating because it takes so much pressure off of making the decision and allows me to think more clearly. And I think this works because the real power of decision isn't in making the decision, it's in sticking with it. There are very few decisions that are truly irreversible, and I found that there is a huge gap between declarative and procedural knowledge, what I might reason intellectually to be true, versus the actual experience of it. And I have come to believe that if I'm ever truly unclear, just starting down the path of what I think the better choice will be, just gaining that little bit of experience, will very quickly tell me if I'm right. I'll just know, often almost immediately. And then I reinforce that decision by continuing to move in that direction. It's that reinforcement, the act of sticking with it, that's where the real decision is made. To conceptualize this, think back to the last time that you were struggling to make a decision with something. So maybe on Monday you thought, okay, I'm going with option A for these 5 reasons. And then you wake up on Tuesday and you think, no. I'm going with option B, and here's why. And maybe you go back and forth with this for a while. But what we don't realize is that each of those thoughts is a decision. You made the decision for option A, and then you made the decision for option B. And that's true even if you know in the back of your mind, oh, I'm still just contemplating this. I'm still just deciding. No, you decided, and then you decided again. They are separate decisions. It's just that you're putting your focus in the wrong place. You're focusing on the act of making the decision, not keeping the decision. So you made a choice in that moment, and you just didn't stick with that choice. It's the consistency, the reinforcement, that is the real decision here. I don't think that this is just semantics. I have found that thinking in this way reshapes how I think about my decisions, because it feels clearer to me that, generally, I should default to decisions that I have already made. That doesn't mean I never change my mind. It means that the reigning decision, the current path, is like the control group. I stick to it unless something can very clearly overpower it. If some condition changes, or if I get new information that I didn't have, then that's a new decision. And if that new decision isn't obvious, then the answer is no. Hey guys, so I don't run outside ads or get sponsors for the podcast, which means I rely on you to help keep it going. The best way you can do that is to help spread the word. Leave a 5-star review, tell your friends, share it on social. I think we all know people who are struggling, and I know issues like stress and negativity can be hard to talk about, which makes sharing a link a really easy way to connect and tell someone you care. And if you find the podcast helpful, I promise you they will too. So do me a quick favor and think of 3 people you know who would benefit from this podcast and send them a link. That's it. Now, back to the show. And the reason I like to approach it in this way is because indecision is very often a symptom of hidden doubts and fears that we hold. And that doubt has many faces. It likes to distort our thinking with unnecessary worries and questions about what we're doing. But doubt rarely gives us a viable alternative. It just tries to tear down where we are. There's often a glimpse of a new idea or an alternate course that we might take, but it's always a facade. So for me, thinking, okay, in order for me to change course, this facade has to be real. The new choice has to be very, very clear. That helps me to see that often my apparent indecision is really just doubt. It's just fear. Which brings us to the second principle, which is that I find that when I really look at it, when I'm really honest with myself, indecision is almost always disguising a fear of some kind. There is always the choice that I know is right, and the choice that my mind thinks is right, or should be right. The turmoil, the struggle, comes when the mind thinks that we should follow a path that we intuitively know isn't right for us. Usually for me, my mind comes up with a lot of very good reasons for it. I can give you a whole list, whereas the intuitive choice just feels right in a way that I can't quite describe. I just can't put my finger on it. And I think the real challenge is that for decisions that are important to us, there can actually be fears on both sides of the equation. Both sides of the decision can have fears embedded within them. We can be afraid of one aspect of option A, and then equally afraid of a different aspect of option B. But if we understand this, then we can see that making a decision isn't really about the decision. It's about uncovering what those fears are, uncovering the fears that are keeping us from clarifying and acting on what we know is right. When we get out of our own way, the decision is always clear. And this also ties into what I said a minute ago about just moving towards one decision. Because when we get stuck overthinking it, it can be tough to identify and see through those fears. But as we move in one direction, firstly, the fear becomes more obvious, so we know what it is that we're dealing with. And secondly, we begin to see more clearly that that fear isn't real. But we can't know that when we're still trying to decide. And this gets into the third principle, which is that indecision causes stress because it pulls us out of alignment. It's that gap between what we know and what we think we should do that causes us to lose alignment. So we feel torn or scattered because that mental block, that little voice telling us that we shouldn't do what we know we should do, is pulling us off center. And I think this is why that idea of sticking with a decision often comes down to trust. If I am clear, I trust in myself. The two go hand in hand. So if I am clear on a decision in the moment that I make that decision, then in that moment, I trust in it. Even if I get pulled off later, in the moment I decide, I am clear. Even if that clarity only lasts for a few moments. Alignment equals clarity, and clarity equals trust. So sticking with the decision then becomes an issue of trust. I can just ask myself, am I going to trust in the clarity that I know that I had when I made this decision? Or am I going to let this doubt, this fear, pull me away from that clarity? Again, I like thinking in this way because it makes the choice more obvious, and it brings my attention to the real struggles that are going on, which are always internal. I find it usually has very little to do with the decision itself. The decision is just the trigger, the symbol for the inner conflict. When I remember that, I come back into alignment, and once again, the decision becomes clear. Okay, number 4. The cost of an unmade decision is higher than you think, and often costs more than a wrong decision. This principle took me a really long time to learn, and I think it's really, really tough if you are emotionally tied in to whatever decision that you're making. Often, when we're struggling with indecision, the very act of being stuck causes us to incorrectly evaluate the decision that we're making. The more attached we become to making the right choice, the bigger deal it becomes to us. And we will often incorrectly assume that there is a huge cost to making the wrong choice. Because emotionally, it feels like a big deal. So we begin to think that it is a big deal, even when it's not. It can feel like the decision is all or nothing, and it can feel like we're risking everything. And that just reinforces our need to get it right. When we get stuck in that mode, we cannot see that the real cost is the time and the energy that we spend in indecision. Think about it. Have you ever agonized over something for a week and then realized later that in that week you could have just easily tried out one option, failed, and moved on to the next? This is especially true for data-driven decisions that we can just test. So if you're agonizing over a marketing campaign, for example, then you could just try one out, fail, and try the next. And you wouldn't lose the time and the energy and the willpower trying to go over it again and again and again. Not only do you lose the time that you spend making the decision versus actually executing on it, but you also have this huge mental burden, which then filters into everything else that you do. At an extreme level, you feel analysis paralysis and you just stare out the window all day. But even when the decision is small, the indecision has a mental cost. It creates an open loop that the mind keeps coming back to over and over again, which causes more stress and reduces your ability to focus on other tasks that you have or other decisions that you have to make. But when we're stuck in that open loop, we don't see the indecision as a cost. We only see the cost of potential negative outcomes. So we see the cost of failure, but not of staying stuck. Imagine that you have some money in the bank and you're trying to decide how to invest it, how to grow the money over time. Well, indecision is kind of like keeping all of your money in cash because you're afraid to make an investment. It looks like you're being sensible and stable, but really, it's just guaranteeing that you're going to lose, because inflation will inevitably chip away at the value. In the same way, indecision chips away at your ability to function at a high level. And often, not always, but often, it would actually be much less risky to make any decision, literally any choice, than it is to stay stuck. And this is especially true in our data-driven world. You can usually decide, get some data, then reevaluate. But that reevaluation isn't indecision. It's a new decision. It's a better informed decision. It's not staying stuck, spinning in the same open loop. Lastly, number 5, we always already know the right path to take. Sometimes we just can't see it. And this ties back into what I was saying earlier about the balance between the intuitive and logical minds. We always have a natural, intuitive pulse that is guiding us in our choices. In our hyper-logical world, we often ignore that intuitive pulse. But if we can learn how to recognize it and trust it, we can always have that sense of just knowing what is right. And as I said before, often this knowingness is a feeling that we can't quite describe. It just feels right. We just know. Learning to recognize this feeling doesn't mean that we ignore the logical mind, not at all. But it does help us to become clearer about when our logical mind is working for us and when it's working against us. When the mind is just creating those doubts and the fears that are holding us back. More than anything, I think this last principle is important because it can be a reminder that we already know the right answer. If on an intuitive level we have already made the decision, then all we have to do is stick with that choice. We just have to trust in it. And I think that's the key that ties everything I've said today together. If we can just reframe our focus away from thinking that we have these huge decisions in front of us and towards the idea of, I've already made the decision and I just need to trust in the decision that I've made. Unless, of course, there is some new evidence that is sufficiently strong for me to choose differently. If we can adopt that mindset, then I think it will, firstly, help us to make decisions more quickly, which in and of itself has a tremendous amount of value, especially if you're running a business and you constantly have things coming at you. But it will also make us more likely to stick with our decisions and actually get the results that we want from them, rather than flip-flopping around it. And lastly, it will help us to feel calmer, more confident, and more focused, so we can actually operate at a higher level, which leads us into a virtuous, positive cycle of clear thinking, clear decisions, and right actions, which will drive us towards whatever goal it is that we've set for ourselves. So I encourage you to play with adopting that idea. See how it works for you. I have already decided my current reigning decision is the default. And unless this new choice is significantly better, if it is not obvious, then I stick with my current choice. Try that on for a while. See how it feels. See if it impacts the way that you're able to move throughout your day and your week. And let me know. So that's it for today. I hope you found these frames helpful. And if you're struggling with decisions that you have to make, then I want you to know that at The Joy Within, we teach a 5-step process that will help you to step back, gain clarity and focus, and move you into that state of calm, confident action. So you can download a free guide for that at thejoywithin.org/5steps. That's thejoywithin.org/5steps. And I'll include a link below as well. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, please pass it along. The podcast only grows through word of mouth. So please, leave a 5-star review and then send a link to someone you know who will enjoy it as much as you do. Thank you so much for your time. Know that I love you and I appreciate you wherever you are. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to The Joy Within. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please do what you can to spread the word. I believe that we all deserve to feel calm, confident, and happy literally every single day. But with everything that's going on in the world, we need to work together to remind ourselves of that in as many little ways as we can. So please, pass this along to the people you care about. Email a friend, share it on social, do whatever feels right for you, so that hopefully, together, we can create a little more peace in our crazy modern world.